What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Welcome back to Truth Be Told, where we believe an experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and with me today, my co-host, Walt Lusk.
Hey, and I'm Walt Lusk, and today's show is sponsored by Conscious Life Expo, and you can get your tickets to Conscious Life for 2015 conference by going to consciouslifeexpo.com. Remember, it's only 2 weeks away, and you really don't want to miss it, and tickets are still available.
And we will be streaming live all 3 days from the expo, February 6th through the 8th, right here on ubnradio.com.
And take your mind on a literary journey by traveling over to adventuresunlimitedpress.com to purchase many of the books from our famed experts featured right here on Truth Be Told.
Tonight, we welcome back an extraordinary author and former guest, Ralph Ellis. Ralph took us on a journey last time here to talk about Jesus and his relations to the pharaohs of Egypt. Tonight, we begin with a subject I am not really familiar with, the Jewish Zodiacs. This is what Truth Be Told is all about, discovering the truth through the ones that have lived it.
Absolutely. After we discover what the Jewish Zodiacs are, we will dive into the histories of the biggest mysteries, the Ark of the Covenant and its sacred stones. Where is it? Does it really exist? Does our guest Ralph Ellis have all the answers? Today we just might find the truth.
This show could be controversial, challenge your beliefs, and it might even open up your mind to a new way of thinking.
Yeah.
That said, let's introduce our guest, author Ralph Ellis. And he's back for more.
Yes, indeed. Good to be back with you again.
Welcome
and
back.
we're back for more, too.
I know. We couldn't get enough. We couldn't get enough.
No, absolutely not.
Definitely.
It was challenging last time. It's going to be worse this time.
I know, right? Well, Eddie Connor is not here, and he's out of town, so he said he wishes he could be here, so he wanted to say hi, first of all. And which will lead us into the first question is we wanted to really get into this subject of zodiacs because we have people here on our station that are astrologists and numerologists, but I honestly have never heard about the Jewish Zodiac.
Nor I.
So if you would not mind introducing us to this and intrigue us.
Yeah, I mean, and there's the Eastern astrology, there's the Western astrology, so now you're going to enlighten us to the Jewish one, okay?
Yeah, well, it was very big in the East. And yes, people don't talk about it very much. But yes, they've done a lot of archaeology in Israel and in Jordan, and a little bit in Syria as well. And they've discovered 6 synagogues dating from, well, they think from the 3rd to the 6th century AD. And they all have a zodiac on the floor.
Wow.
So the biggest, most central component within this synagogue is a zodiac. And yes, it's caused some controversy because some of the religious types have said, no, these are not synagogues. And they're saying, yes, it is, because, well, you only have to look at the top of them and you will see above the zodiac, it's got the Ark of the Covenant and the various accoutrements that go with Judaism.
Well, maybe they never looked up.
Right.
Yeah, obviously they didn't. Well, they're just trying to deny it. In fact, the one on the Sea of Galilee, they had a team of fundamentalists went down there and tried to hack it to pieces.
Oops. Really?
Because they didn't like it, because it doesn't fit in with their agenda. So yeah, there are a number of zodiacs in what used to be Judea, Greater Judea, including Jordan. And they are zodiacs exactly as we have them now, the same constellations exactly as we have them now. But when I say these are Jewish. I would say they're Nazarene rather than just being
Jewish, okay.
Jewish. So this is the Nazarene sect, which is the sect of Jesus and James, which was in the books of Josephus. He calls them the fourth sect. So there was another new sect of Judaism came into that region at that time in the first century. They had the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and then they had the Essene on the shores of the Dead Sea. And then they had the fourth sect, which was the revolutionary sect, which caused the Jewish revolt in AD 60. And the Essenes were probably an offshoot of the fourth sect. And it's quite obvious that the fourth sect was the Nazarene, the Church of Jesus and James. Right. And these are the people, I think, who were more into the Zodiac than the rest of Judaism. And so, yes, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, just below Tiberias, there is one of the most marvelous zodiacs you can see from ancient times. It's a huge, great zodiac, and it's very, very well drawn in mosaics, of course, so it all still exists. And the interesting thing about these zodiacs is it's fairly obvious that these are processional zodiacs. So these are not the zodiacs from, your local newspaper or magazine that try and predict, what's going to happen
can you
tomorrow.
On that? What does processional mean?
Processional. Okay, processional. So this is not concerned with each month in the year. This is concerned with each millennia, each 2 millennia, in fact. So this is precession of the equinox. So this is a real astronomical event. The Earth wobbles on its axis,
right?
And it's a big wobble that takes 26,000 years.
Yes,
and in doing so, it makes the constellations change as you go through the millennia. And part of the ancient religions was recording and noting this change in the zodiacs. And these are known as the great months. So a great month within history lasts about 2,240 years, roughly on average, as you go through each constellation. So if we go back into history, that the first recorded, I suppose, constellation we sort of know about would be Taurus. So that was the worship of the Apis bull, and of course from Minoan Greece, where the worship of the bull was central to their religion, the Minotaur. And then back in about 1750 BC, there was a change in the constellations. So the great month of Taurus ended, and the great month of Aries began. So we went from the bull to the sheep. And this is essentially is what caused the Old Testament to be written. That's why all of the Old Testament patriarchs are called shepherds, because they were followers of Aries. And
that's very interesting. Not followers of Jesus, mind you, but okay.
Well, he was part of it. We'll come on to that. So, right. So they all identified themselves with sheep.
Wow.
So if you go through the leaders and the kings and the priests of that era, they were all linked to sheep. So the patriarchs called themselves the shepherds. The Hyksos pharaohs of Egypt called themselves the shepherd kings. Moses had the 2 horns on his head, which you'll see on some of the statues, of course. And then we have the coins. I probably gave you some pictures.
Yes, you did.
I'll display them right now.
If you look at the bottom, you'll see Alexander the Great, and he's got the 2 horns of the ram in his hair, because he was born under Aries. He was born under the great month of Aries. And the one on the right is Ptolemy III from Egypt as Hercules, so he looks a bit like Hercules. And again, you can see the horn just above the hole in the center of the coin there.
Right.
So they are all sort of identifying themselves as kings of Aries, because they knew they were born under the processional great month of Aries. And then, of course, we came to the 1st century, and we had another change in the heavens. So this particular constellation was not as big as the other ones. They're all different sizes, of course. And so this one only lasted 1,750 years. And so at year 0, pretty much, I normally say AD 10 because people get confused with AD 0, the heavens changed again. And we went from Aries into Pisces. And it was because of that we had this big change in the New Testament. And that's why Jesus was born as a Lamb of God under Aries, but became a fisher of men, Pisces. So he was noting that change in the great month, from the great month of Aries into the great month of Pisces.
Wow.
And that's why that was such a momentous period. That's why he was such a famous king, because he was the first of the fisher kings. If you go into Arthurian legend, which we might touch on a bit later, of course, the famous line of kings within Arthurian legend are the fisher kings,
right?
Because they were the kings of Pisces. So we entered, the great month of Pisces in year 0, and as the song said, I forget who wrote it now, we're at the dawn of the age of Aquarius. Who wrote that
Fifth
one?
Dimension.
There you go.
Good job.
Because different in the movie, which is very different in the movie Fisher King, by the way, but with Robin Williams. But yeah, it was the Fifth Dimension in the 70s.
So the next constellation in turn is Aquarius, but that doesn't happen for some time. Actually, my calculation is about 2,400 AD, something like that, and we go into.
So we haven't hit it yet.
Yeah, we'll be gone.
No. It's a big one. Unfortunately, Pisces is quite big, so we don't hit Aquarius until much later.
Okay.
So that is precession, and that is what they were marking. This is what these zodiacs were all about. If you want to trace a monarchy, a civilization, a people, how do you mark out a history in time? It's very difficult. You can lose your history very quickly within time.
Right.
Because where are the markers that you mark it against? Well, if you can do it via the heavens, then you have a sure sign marker that you can trace throughout your history. And so if your monarchs identify themselves with the constellation they were born under, you know when those monarchs lived. And that's what they were doing. So Jesus was the first of the fisher kings. That's why Christianity has the sign of the fish.
Sign of the fish.
Because it was started under Pisces. And so if we look at that particular zodiac, it's a nice zodiac actually, isn't it? This is the one this is Hamat Tavera. And I'm sure you'll put it up on the video for people to see later.
Right now.
And it's a proper zodiac, isn't it? It's very nice, very colorful.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
And we have Helios in the middle, which is, the image of the sun. And an interesting part of this, if you notice, Helios is holding a spherical blue and green earth.
We can see
Clever that, isn't it?
It is clever.
Yeah. So they knew he is the sun, and he's holding in his gravitational grasp, he's holding a spherical blue and green earth.
So they knew way back then that the Earth wasn't flat, huh?
Oh, absolutely. It's exactly like the Earth you have on your little symbol there for Universal Broadcasting Network. Yeah, I'm trying to read it. It's exactly the same as you have there on your symbol. They knew that
our logo.
The Earth was not only spherical, but it was blue and green as well.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm showing that, and I did a close-up so people can see it. And, yeah, it's pretty amazing to see the Earth very clearly. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, in his because he's the sun, he's holding it in his gravitational grasp. So it also clearly states, because the sun is holding the Earth, that the Earth must rotate around the sun. It's not the other way around, is it? Because the master here is Helios, the sun, and he's holding the Earth. So therefore, the Earth must travel around the sun. So they knew that as well.
May I ask
but
one question? I
oh,
see his hand is up like he's waving.
yes,
What does that symbol mean? What is he? What is?
it's very common for a symbol of the gods, and I'm not entirely sure what it means, but Helios will always have his hand up like that.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know, is it some sort of greeting? Is it
Yeah,
some
it looks
sort of,
like a greeting, but it's
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. I'll have to look into that. There are lots of hand signals. If you look around especially the Renaissance paintings, you'll see a lot of hand signals amongst, the Christian paintings.
Right.
There's the single finger, the sign of John, and then you get the double finger, which doesn't mean what it does today. And you also get this one, which is typical of Christianity. And not
Mm-hmm.
entirely sure what it means, but if you see anything with someone very religious in it, a bishop or something, they will always do this
We
hand
used to do
signal.
that for a sock puppet or a rabbit, in the.
Yeah, yeah, that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, what else we got on this? Yeah, if you look at that
Well,
zodiac, you'll see.
and I also notice the colors. I mean, because the colors have to mean something. I don't know, maybe you do know or not, but in the top half is it has looks like is that like a dragon and fish, and then right in the center it's blank. Is that something that just got eroded?
Yeah, someone built a road across it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in ancient times.
Right.
Yeah, someone built a wall across here because the original building was destroyed,
it's
and
good
then someone
size
built a
then.
new building across it, and unfortunately they destroyed the Zodiac when
That's
they went
too
through
bad.
it.
Yeah, that's gorgeous too.
Yeah, that's the problem with archaeology. Not everything lasts. So we lost the bottom of the Helios. He's supposed to be sitting in a chariot with
Oh, okay.
horses.
That would have been great to
Um,
see the chariot.
Yeah, but the chariot's gone. One of the other ones does, Hatch, is in my book. This is in Cleopatra to Christ. And one of the other zodiacs has the full chariot and the four horses. He's in I think they call it a quadrida chariot with four horses being pulled across the skies, of course. But notice where his head is on this one. I like this one because his head is pointing exactly between Aries and Pisces.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a sheep on the left there. He's sort of upside down. You
Yeah.
have to look at it the other way up. So that's a sheep and two fish. So that's his head is pointing exactly
Exactly center.
between
Yeah.
Aries and Pisces.
Even the ray of the sun goes right in the center.
right through it.
Sheep
Yeah.
and two fish sounds like dinner.
Yeah, right.
Well, this is the two fish, of course, from Jesus in the wilderness with the 5 loaves and the 2
I was gonna
fishes.
say feeding the 5,000.
Yeah, but
Okay.
the 2 fishes are Pisces, of course. And bread within the New Testament means knowledge.
Okay.
It's always a code word for knowledge.
Well,
So
Christ was the bread
Jesus-
of life, so right.
Sorry.
Christ was the bread of life.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Well, it might. Yes, I suppose it could come from that. But the main one it comes from is when Jesus was talking to the Greek woman, and he calls her a dog because she's Greek, and she says, "Yes, master, but even the dog can have the crumbs from the master's table."
Mm-hmm.
And when that's described in the Gnostic Gospels, the bread is actually said to be the knowledge that he was given. So he wasn't giving pieces of bread to her, he was giving pieces of knowledge. And so the feeding of the 5,000 with the bread and the fishes
Yes.
is the teaching, the knowledge of Pisces. So he was teaching these people in the wilderness about the great month of Pisces. That's what it was all about.
So, is your take on that parable, if you will, or that event? Was it more theoretical in terms of feeding them a knowledge, or was it the
Yeah.
fishes and the bread actually multiplied and they actually ate fishes and bread?
No. This was allegorical. So he was talking about the knowledge of Pisces, the bread of fish.
Okay.
So it probably happened in terms of this big group of people being out in the wilderness. The wilderness, by the way, is Qumran. So they were down at the Essene headquarters down at Qumran.
Okay.
So they were in the desert, in the wilderness, as it's called, and he was teaching them the great month of
And
Pisces.
and as it finished, I believe the story says, and they were satisfied.
Yeah, because they understood it, hopefully.
Uh-huh.
So here we have on this zodiac, we have his head pointing at exactly between Aries and Pisces. So this gives us a date, because this is what this business of precession is all about. You can date this zodiac from the position of Helios.
Oh, interesting.
And this date is AD 10, the birth of Jesus.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So you're saying, and I know we talked about this last time, for those of you that missed it, go check out the archives, that Christ wasn't born in 0, but he was the clock, if you will, the time is later. That's your theory?
Because, well, the New Testament gives us several dates that we can go for. We've
Okay.
got the 4 or 6 BC
Yes.
in Herod the Great, but that's the wrong Herod. And then we've got the 6 AD under Quirinus,
Yes.
which is the taxation. And he was probably the taxation event 86. But if you read Bishop Irenaeus, he seems to look at AD 14. So there's a range of dates, but it's around the sort of, AD 6 to AD 14
Okay.
mark.
Okay.
And that's as close as you can get with precession. You can't get closer than, say, plus or minus 10 years. Because it depends where you draw the line between, the constellations. One person might say then, and then another person might say no, another 10 years or 20 years. So that's about as close as you can get to the actual date. But it is a 1st century, beginning of the 1st century zodiac. And that's what it's marking. And it was probably actually built at this time as well, because the archaeologists say this came from the 3rd century. But it didn't, because it's a 1st century processional image. And secondly, we have a description of it within Josephus Flavius, which is quite remarkable. And this is almost perfect in its description. So Josephus Flavius, who's the big historian from the 1st century, and he wrote all about the 1st century Judea and all about the Jewish revolt. So we're talking about a date in the AD 60s here, probably about AD 66 or something of that nature. And Josephus Flavius becomes the army commander in charge of Galilee. So he was quite an important person, this guy, and he was quite rich too. And anyway, he is sent by the Judean authorities to go and destroy the pictures of animals just south of Tiberias. It says 4 furlongs south of Tiberias, where there were images of animals, and he was sent to destroy them. Well, this zodiac is 4 furlongs south of Tiberias. It is the same zodiac. And what's more, the place he was sent to has the same name as this. It's Hamat Tiberia. So Josephus Flavius actually writes in his book, I think it's actually in his Life, not in Jewish War, I think it's in Life. And he was sent to actually destroy this very zodiac that we're looking at now.
And what was the purpose of it being destroyed? Do we know?
Well, because it had images of animals.
Animals, yes, okay.
This is why this is not a standard Judaic zodiac, because under standard Orthodox Judaism, you're not allowed to have images of animals. This is why it was the 4th sect. This is a Nazarene, and they were slightly different to Orthodox Judaism.
And if the animals were hoofed, then that would even be worse.
Yeah, well, there's a Taurus there somewhere. So.
Well, Ralph,
next to Aries.
I'm going to ask a quick question. This may be a little off the subject, but I know astrology was not really specifically mentioned in the Quran, but in the Torah, but in the Bible, there's a few commandments that talk about, forbidden the practice of astrology. And so where did this change? Because apparently, Judaism must have put this together. So where did it change to make this a forbidden practice, or what's the connection
Well,
here?
we have two big changes in the religion. So original Judaism would have had the zodiac. There is no doubt.
Right.
Original Judaism was not really iconoclastic either. If you read all about the united monarchy of King David and King Solomon,
Right.
they had loads of images of different animals, and they were building temples to all sorts of different gods, and they had temple prostitutes and all these sort of things in the Temple of Solomon. And they had the sacred groves, so they had sacred trees, they had maypoles, they had phallic symbols, they had, Macatama was caught worshipping an erect penis at one point within the Old Testament, which is covered up. They don't call it that. They call it a Priapus. So if you know your Greek, Priapus was Roman, was he? No, he was Greek. Anyway, if you know your Greek mythology, you'll know what a Priapus was. It was a little godlet with a very unfortunate growth. So yes, old Judaism was not like Orthodox Judaism we see now. It had many gods. They were always, the priesthood were always complaining about them worshipping other gods. And finally, at some point, probably after the Babylonian exile, they managed to get rid of all of these other gods and all these other images. And probably at that time, Judaism became properly sort of monotheistic and iconoclastic. They got rid of all of the images.
Well, doesn't one of in the Bible in the Old Testament says thou shalt not have no other gods before me, right?
Yeah, but they never kept to
that.
Right.
They never kept to that at all. If you read Jeremiah, he's Jeremiah is a mad priest who's fulminating against everybody.
Okay. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
Resolution.
Dear old Jeremiah.
Right,
he is having a go at them because they keep worshipping the Queen of Heaven. And of course, the Queen of Heaven is Isis. So we know the Jews. This is about 600 BC.
Even when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he had the Ten Commandments, and they were sitting there worshiping a calf or something.
Which was Taurus, of course. That's why he got upset, because this was the change from Taurus to Aries.
And he got a little steamed in the matter.
Yeah, that's right. Broke the golden calf.
Yes, he did.
But then we had another. So they became Orthodox, say, 600 BC, whatever, time of the Babylonian exile. But obviously not all the Jews did. And these fourth sect, Nazarene Jews, were holding on to the original Judaism. And the original Judaism was Egyptian, of course.
Okay.
As I point out in one of my books, Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt, Solomon was not terribly Judaic. He was an Egyptian. He was an Egyptian pharaoh. So was King David.
Now you talk about, just to back up a bit, if I might interrupt you, you make this statement, and then you've also said in the previous show that we did that the palaces of King David and palaces of King Solomon are in Egypt.
Yes, in Tanis.
So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, as we went through last time in the previous talk, the United Monarchy is missing from the archaeology. So they've researched, the archaeology of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem did not exist during the United Monarchy. It wasn't there. As Finkelstein says, Jerusalem was no more than a village. So the whole of that Kings and Chronicles within the Torah is either untrue because it did not exist, or we're looking in the wrong place for it. And I think we're looking in the wrong place for it. It didn't exist in Jerusalem, which was called Zion. It was in Zoan, which is Tanis. And so these monarchs were not just monarchs of Judea. They did control Judea, but their capital city was in Egypt. It was in Tanis. And they controlled all of northern Egypt and all of Judea as well. So that was their whole of their kingdom stretched right up to the top of Israel. And yes, they were very powerful monarchs. They were the most powerful monarchs in that region at that time, just as the Torah says. But their capital city was in Egypt. And if you go and look at their capital city, it is substantially Egyptian. Well, it's more than substantially. It is Egyptian.
Have you had the privilege to go to many of these places?
Yes, yeah. Tanis is very nice. It's one of the best places in Egypt because nobody goes there. So it's right up the top. So there's no hotels there whatsoever. I had to stay in Zagazig. Zagazig is in the middle of the delta, and we had to get a car up there, and the roads up there.
How far is that? What's the distance?
It took 4 hours.
Oh,
it's not very far actually, but it took 4 hours because the roads are just awful.
Yeah.
And I went up there for 2 days, and I was the only person there for 2 days.
Oh
That would be nice.
Oh my goodness.
I had the whole place to myself, and it's a big, big site. You know, it was one of the
Wow.
biggest cities that has ever been uncovered.
Wow.
And it's got more archaeology to see there than probably going down into Thebes. And it's got some of the finest carved pillars I've ever seen. These are very ancient. This is not modern Egypt. This is very ancient. You know, a lot of the stuff you see, if you go down to Thebes, a lot of the stuff down there is Ptolemaic, so it's Greek. It's from, you know, about 300 BC to about 0 BC, as it were.
Okay.
If you go to Tanis, this is really ancient stuff, and so the pillars are all granite, and they're made into like palm trees, which is why it was probably called Phoenix, probably, because Phoenix means palm tree, by the way. And so it was the city of palm trees, or Tamar is the original name for it in the Aramaic, because Tamar means palm tree. And they are the finest, most fantastic carved pillars you've ever seen anywhere in Egypt. They are truly fantastic. So it's a wonderful sight. If you can ever get up there, it's very, very good. And of course, their tomb is there. So the tomb of those kings is still there, and their temple is still there. And it just so happens that the temple has the same name as the Jewish temple. It's called the Haikal. But instead of being called the Haikal Yahweh,
Yes.
the temple of Yahweh, it's called the Haikal Ptah. It's called the temple of Ptah, the Egyptian god. So yeah, their capital city was there in Tanis. So at that time, of course, yes, of course they would have had multiple gods, just like it says in the Torah, because it was Egyptian. And yeah, they didn't become Jewish as we tend to think of Judaism now until probably 5th or 6th century BC, when they were finally exiled into Jerusalem, which was a lot later, of course. But some of these people kept the original religion going, so they never actually lost it. There was obviously some people, probably down in Egypt, probably down in Alexandria, who kept these old ways still going. Remember, Egypt was still Egypt in the 1st century. It wasn't destroyed probably until the 3rd century AD, you know, after Christianity got going, and then they destroyed Alexandria and the library. It was probably only at that time that original Egyptian science, learning, understanding was destroyed. So in the 1st century, it was probably all still there. And where did Jesus go for his education?
He went to Egypt.
He went to Egypt.
Yes, he did.
Who was John the Baptist's favorite pupil? Here's one to test you.
No.
They were both, Jesus and John the Baptist were born about the same time. So, just for giggles, I'm going to say Jesus, but I'm not sure that's correct.
No, it was Simon Magus.
Can I take film for 40?
Yeah. Anyway, so Simon Magus was the best pupil, the primary pupil of John the Baptist, and he lived in Alexandria.
Okay.
Yet again. So we go back to Alexandria. So a lot of these people studied. So John the Baptist probably, if his primary pupil lived in Alexandria, we can be fairly sure that John the Baptist was down there as well.
That's a safe assumption, potentially.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're all down there. Jesus was down there, Simon Magus, and John the Baptist. So where did their learning come from? Where did their understanding come from? It came from Egypt. And so these people were not the sort of orthodoxy type Jews that we know today. These were Egypto-Jews. And if we come to, was it Strabo? I think it was Strabo said, he was describing the people of Judea and Jerusalem, and he said, the Jews are a mixture of people from many places, but of all the people in the Temple of Jerusalem, the majority come from Egypt. Okay, so there was still a very, very strong association with Egypt in those days, and that's why.
Well, again, the parting of the Red Sea, the 40-year wilderness. I mean, the story goes it originated from Egypt, right?
Yeah, they came from Egypt, but a lot of that is allegorical again.
Okay.
We've got lots of time, haven't we?
We have plenty of time.
We can go off on a tangent, can't we?
That's good. We need a tangent here anyway.
Yeah, let's have a tangent.
Tangent.
Yeah, a tangent. So, 40 years in the wilderness. You have to understand what this book was talking about. Otherwise, it makes no sense. You cannot have people for 40 years in the Sinai. It's not possible. You can't stay 40 days in the Sinai, let alone 40 years. The Sinai, I don't know if you've been to the Sinai. The Sinai is an extension of the Sahara Desert.
Okay. Yeah,
you can't live there.
Well, they said it was in the desert, so I'm sure it was a pretty toasty place.
Yeah, very toasty. But there's no water, there's no food, there's nothing there.
Well, they talked about manna.
Yeah,
debate
what
that is. It's called,
yeah. So what does it mean? Well, we have to go back to where these people came from. This Exodus came out of Egypt.
Yes.
And it actually started in Middle Egypt, and then they went up to Pyramisi. And Pyramisi was Avaris, which is where the Hyksos Exodus started from.
Mm-hmm.
So did we go through this? I'm not quite sure.
I don't think we went this detail.
No, we did not go this
so the
far.
Hyksos...
Did you go this far down the rabbit hole?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Exodus, the Israelite Exodus, was the Hyksos Exodus. So here's a piece of history for you. A long time ago in Egypt, a people were called the Hyksos. These were the shepherd kings. So we have a group of people called shepherds. They wore earrings and curly side locks of hair. They had a war with the Egyptians. There was darkness for 3 days and an ash fall. Their leader was called Jacob, and they were kicked out of Egypt. They went from Pyramisi, and they went on a big exodus. There was 500,000 of them. They went on a big exodus to Jerusalem.
Okay.
Now, does that sound familiar?
This isn't the same Jacob that was mentioned in the Old Testament early on, is it?
Well, precisely.
Okay.
What I'm giving you and the listeners a piece of real history. This is the history of the Hyksos Exodus.
And you're saying it's documented, of course.
In the Bible. It's exactly the same in every respect to the Israelite Exodus.
Okay.
You know, the Israelites did start from Pyramisi. You know, they did wear curly side locks of hair. Their leader was called Jacob. And they, 500,000 of them did go from Egypt into Jerusalem. It's identical.
Okay.
The only reason why people will not accept that it's identical is because this happened in 1600 BC, which is a bit earlier than people expect.
That's a little early, yeah.
Well, it's not that much earlier. It's only 400 years earlier. So it's...
Wait, 1600 BC?
Yeah, 1600 BC.
Oh, I see what you're saying. As opposed to 1200 BC.
Yeah. So it's about a 400 years difference, but there's a good reason for that, and we'll come to that later. So the Exodus, we know all about it. It was a real Exodus. It actually happened. It was the Hyksos Exodus, and we have the evidence of
Okay.
the Hyksos Exodus in the historical record. Oh, by the way, the Hyksos, when they went to Jerusalem, they're the ones who went and trashed Jericho. So Jericho was actually destroyed by the Hyksos.
So, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down.
Yeah, and it was never built on again since.
As in the Old
That's
Testament.
why we know that the Israelite Exodus did not happen as it's given to us currently by Orthodox theology, because Jericho didn't exist.
Okay.
In
so
the
here's
1200s.
another proof that it was a different time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you said
Absolutely.
it's
Hyksos. Well, some people call it the Hyksos, but
Okay.
Manetho says there's two ways of pronouncing it. It's either the Hyksos or the Hyksos.
Perfect. Okay.
And it means the shepherd kings. They were called shepherds, just like the Israelites were called shepherds. And these were the Hyksos. So, but they started originally, this Exodus started from Middle Egypt, and it went up into the Delta and then off, of course, up towards Jerusalem.
Right.
So they were passing by Cairo at the time.
Okay.
And when it says that they were in the desert, in the wilderness for 40 years, and they were circling the mountains. Why were they circling mountains? What's all this business about circling mountains? Well, and circling Mount Sinai. Well, we did this in the last discussion.
We did
didn't
this one. Yeah, we did this portion.
Mount Sinai
Is in
was
Egypt.
the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Right.
So you said that. Well, you said that. I don't remember you specifying that it was the Great Pyramid of Giza, but you said that there's a perfect description of Mount Sinai in the Bible that fits a
Yes.
location in Egypt, and so you're.
Which is the Great Pyramid. So Mount Sinai is the Great Pyramid
Oh my
of
gosh!
Giza.
You did not divulge that nugget
Yeah,
of
I don't remember
information.
that either.
No, last time you
Okay.
you
So
kind of left that part out.
That's a big secret. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I was saying that, how can they lose their biggest mountain,
Right.
their most sacred mountain? They didn't lose it. But what they didn't want you to know was that it was the Great Pyramid of Giza.
So you're implying that Mount Sinai, Moses went to the top of the Great Pyramid of.
Absolutely. It had a stairway all the way up the
Yes.
external cladding. It had a stairway
Understood,
all the way to the
understood,
top.
right?
And that was the stairway to heaven.
And that's where he got the Ten Commandments and did his thing and came back down.
It was on the top of the Great Pyramid, yeah.
Oh my goodness.
It was the biggest mountain in that region, you see.
Yes.
So that's what they were talking about. So this had nothing to do with the Sinai Peninsula.
Well, that I believe because the Great Pyramid is, I mean, from a height perspective and relative to that time, it was huge. I mean, there's nothing taller,
absolutely.
period. I mean, there's no debate,
Absolutely.
no doubt or debate about that. No.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you imagine, most people lived in mud huts, you
Yes.
know.
Right.
Right, yeah, no.
Because
it's not
only
about
the
this.
temples were made of stone. Everybody else lived in sort of
Right.
mud huts.
Yeah, these, I mean,
maximum
these
of-
stones were, many tons. I mean, they still don't know how the pyramids got built, and I know that's a topic for another show, but,
It is, yeah.
no doubt.
But knowing that, we can prove this both ways now, because I have said, and I said this, I don't know, about 15 years ago, I forget when it was, that Mount Sinai is the Great Pyramid. Now, at the Great Pyramid, they went round and round the mountains for some reason, circumnavigating the mountains, as it says in the Old Testament.
Okay.
And they were there for 40 years. So
Yes.
what's this number 40 to do?
My
with all of
understanding
this?
is that that the generation that left, the Lord wasn't too happy with them and wanted to have them wander for that period of time to make sure all of the guys he wasn't happy with died, and they got a new batch.
Yeah. It's a good excuse, isn't it?
I mean, that's something. I mean, what I learned.
Yeah, I would do the same
but
thing.
you can't
learn the same thing?
can't be in the
Yeah.
Sinai Peninsula for 40 years. You can't be there for more than 4 days. You'd all die. So the number 40 has a different meaning, and we can only understand it if we realize that the Great Pyramid is Mount Sinai,
Okay.
because the Great Pyramid happens to be a 40 times multiple of pi.
That makes sense.
And that's where the number 40 comes from. So if you were initiated into the secrets of the Great Pyramid, which these people who went to Alexandria were, then you knew that the number 40 was the special number of Giza, because the Great Pyramid is a 40 times multiple of pi.
Okay.
And so you will have people like Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days and nights.
Yes.
Why? It's just a point of initiation. He's telling you, if you understand, that he was initiated into the secrets of the Great Pyramid. Same with Moses. When Moses went up,
Yes.
was he up Mount Sinai for 40 days? Anyway, he went for 40 days and nights as well. Solomon lived for 40 years, King David for 40 years. All of these mentions of number 40.
So you're implying that, for example, Christ did not, hang out in the wilderness for 40 days and was tempted and whatnot for 40 days?
No, it was just a sign of
it
initiation.
was
To those
it was
who
a
are
longer-
initiated
it was a shorter period of time
into
in
the
reality.
secrets, then you would know that he had been introduced into the secrets of the Great Pyramid, because he mentions very specifically the number 40.
Yes.
And the 40 years in the wilderness is exactly the same. They were going round and round Mount Sinai, which is the Great Pyramid, for 40 years, because it is a 40 times multiple of pi. So all of this was very esoteric.
To say the least.
Yeah, very occult. Occult as in being hidden.
I was going to say, you better be careful of that word.
Yeah, well, the original word means to occult. It means to hide. Normally to hide a body. No, not that type of body. I mean a stellar body like the moon or the sun. If it's eclipsed, it's occulted. It's hidden.
Okay.
And the secrets were hidden as well. They were occult secrets. They were hidden from view. And the only way you would find them out, I mean, especially in the ancient time, how would you know what pi is and that the Great Pyramid is a 40 times?
Well,
You would have no idea.
No, you wouldn't, unless you were educated and aware and knew and whatnot and
In
exposed to it. Yeah, in Egypt.
In Egypt.
Fair enough.
In Alexandria
Yeah,
is the only place you're
All
going
right,
to find out.
fair enough.
And that's why these people went to Alexandria for their education. So this is what it was all about. It was the secrets, the ancient secrets, not of Judaism, but of the ancient religion, the religion of Egypt. And the religion of Egypt was all about the Giza Plateau, which was a temple complex. It was nothing to do with tombs, as I said last time.
No, absolutely not.
No pharaoh
There's
has ever been found.
No, never. No, that's pretty much been debunked.
Yeah.
And many centuries ago, there was water near the pyramids as well, which of course the Nile has wandered off as well.
Yes. And so the pyramids would be the primeval mound.
Okay.
The primeval mound was the beginnings of order amongst the chaos of Nu. And that was the founding myth of Egypt. And since we're there, we might as well stay there. This is where the Genesis story came from, of course.
Well, we've got about what? How much time we got?
We have plenty of time, but real quick, I want to make a quick
a-
announcement that if you're just tuning in or you're listening to the podcast, make sure that you tune into all of our shows here on Friday at UBN Radio. But we're talking to author Ralph Ellis, and he made his return appearance it's been about 6 months ago, and we were so happy and
Man, it's
pleased.
an amazing discussion. We're continuing here on Truth Be Told.
On Truth Be Told,
Yes.
right here on UBN Radio. But
Yes.
we were talking about the Jewish Zodiacs, and then right now we're into the subject of
We've had a tangent.
Yes,
Yeah.
had a little tangent. We'll get back to the
Zodiacs in a minute.
because I want to
Should we
talk about.
there's another one
do you want to go
question.
back to Zodiacs
Yeah,
now, or
well-
should we do a bit of Old Testament?
Let's do Old Testament first.
Let's
because-
finish this
yeah,
real quick,
finish
because I've got
that.
a really quick question I
Yeah.
wanted to ask about numbers
Okay,
as well.
just really
Yeah.
quickly then. The Genesis story
Yes.
is the foundation myth of Egypt, because what is the Genesis story? It's a story. I'm talking about the Noah story here. So it's a story
Noah
about
or creation in the Genesis 1.
Yeah, well, no more than Noah's story, a little
Noah's
bit
story.
later.
Okay.
So we
Ark
have
and
the flood,
the flood and the
and,
ark.
and we have this ark going
Yes.
across the flood,
Yes.
and they're looking for land, and they find some land, and they send out some birds. Well, if you go to the Egyptian creation myth, the original universe was it was not a void; it was a body of water. The chaos of Nu, it was called. And over the waters of Nu, of course, the solar bark of Ra was sailing, the boat of Ra. And the boat of Ra, of course, was full of animals, the gods. And they were all 2 by 2, of course, because every god has his own wife. So you have these boats, the solar boats of Ra, with the animals in them, which were the gods, sailing over the waters of Nu. And it was from the waters of Nu that we get Nua, which is Noah.
Nua, which is Noah.
Yeah, it comes because the chaotic waters of Nu were called Nu, and that's where we get Noah from. And in this ancient myth, a primeval mound arrived in the chaotic waters of Nu, and that was the first mound of order in the chaos. And we'll come across this mound again later, because we're going to go on and talk about the sacred stones.
Yes,
and these sacred stones were representations of this first primeval mound that came out of the chaotic waters of Nu.
Now, but I understanding, digressing really quick, that in all 4 corners of the world there is mention of a flood, and from a timing perspective, they seem to correlate.
Well, yes, but this was a mythical flood, because when they're talking about the waters of Nu, they're talking about the heavens above.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So the skies above, when you look up, they are water. They're not nothing. They're not a vacuum as we see.
Okay.
That they are water. And so the solar boat of Ra will actually sail over those waters in the sea. Just as we would send up a spaceship, they had a space boat exactly the same. And this space boat had the gods inside it and sailed across the waters of the celestial sphere above us. And so that's what they were doing. And they sent out the phoenix to go and find land. And the phoenix went out, and it went and settled upon this primeval mound. So if you see images of the phoenix, you will often see the phoenix standing on a small mound of earth. That is the primeval mound that was discovered by the phoenix.
Okay.
And of course, they were the birds that were sent out by Noah to go and discover land. It's the same story.
Okay.
So the Genesis story is actually the Egyptian creation myth. It's exactly the same. That's where it came from. And all of these myths were preserved and kept within Alexandria. And that is where Jesus went for his education. That's where John the Baptist went for his education. And so this strand of Judaism that had been educated in Egypt had brought themselves back into by various means, because they went via Persia to get there. So we've not been through that story either. Anyway, that's too long to do at the present. Okay. Their family ended up in Persia, and eventually was exiled into Syria. And from Syria, they went down to Judea to take over Judea and the Temple of Jerusalem. And that's how they ended up back down in Jerusalem, founding this new 4th sect, the Nazarene sect. And so that's when we get these zodiacs, coming back to the zodiacs, as we do. That's why we get these zodiacs in Judea and Syria in the 1st century. Because
so when you look at you're saying the 1st century, because obviously a Christian believes that, 0, or AD BC is, of course, after death or before Christ. So what is your delineation with 0 or 1, or, in terms of AD BC?
Yes, good question.
Is it
very
related
good question,
to the Zodiac? Because I think we need to clarify that this hour.
You've spotted the link, haven't you? The 0 year has nothing to do with the birth of Jesus. The 0 year is the 1st year of the great month of Pisces.
Okay.
So
what
we're measuring
now.
So
that's the year of Pisces. So what happens in 2400 when Pisces changes?
Well, you're supposed to re-zero again. Whether we will, I don't know. But at present, we're in 2015 of the great year of Pisces. And yes, when we get to Aquarius, we should re-zero the calendar. But I bet they won't.
I never got that memo.
Yeah.
No, they certainly didn't. They certainly didn't.
I never read that memo.
So much for Y2K,
Definitely so much for Y2K. That's funny.
Well,
yeah, good observation. Yeah, that's exactly what should happen.
Yes, I was just trying to read between the zodiacs. So.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of astrology, and one thing that you have written that I would love to talk about, astrology, King Jesus and King Arthur.
Yes. Now that gets interesting, doesn't it?
That gets very interesting. That's
Well,
I've been looking at these pictures and
well,
thinking,
then
how we gonna...
Abraham, the Pharaoh of Egypt, kind of along those lines, I'm sure is in there somewhere.
Well, this came about. I mean, when I write these books, I have no idea where the book's going to go. Absolutely none. Which is why on my computer, if anyone ever looks at my computer, they'll never find the books because they're all under different names. Because they end up being totally different to how they start. So this particular book is actually called Josephus.
Oh, really?
But of course, it ended up as a book about Jesus, not about Josephus. So, yeah, every single one of my books is like that. They just sort of lead me on into different directions. And this was one of the different directions that it led me upon, because it transpired that Jesus was exiled to England. And that's a whole topic that we might have to do in a separate show, I think. But anyway.
When was he exiled in England? I'm not trying to take away the punchline, but...
Well, AD 72, 74.
So, in other words, you're talking about the subsequent to the resurrection?
No. What happened is all of these events, we typically think that Jesus... his life was in the AD 30s and he was crucified in AD 30 or AD 33.
Yes.
That is a deliberate misinterpretation of what happened.
Okay.
What they didn't want you to know is that this guy was an important prince and king who started the Jewish revolt in Judea.
All right.
Now, the only way they could really stop you from knowing that is to divorce him from that era. And so they brought him back by 40 years and stuck him in the AD 30s, when, of course, there was no revolution. But, the New Testament is clearly talking about a revolution. He was tried alongside Barabbas.
Yes, he was.
And Barabbas had committed murder in the revolution.
Yes.
So what revolution was this? This was the Jewish revolt. This was AD 70. This is how Jesus was able to describe the siege of Jerusalem in the little Apocalypse. This is how he was able to describe the death of Zacharias. The death of Zacharias was in the AD 60s. So how can Jesus talk about this happening? This is also how he can talk about, who was the other person he was... I'll find it in a minute. Anyway, he was talking about another person, Zizit Hakia, Hakesh. Anyway, he's from the Talmud. I'll remember his name in a minute. And Jesus talks about this person and condemns him. Well, he's another AD 60s character. So all of these characters that he's talking about are from the AD 60s, and these are all in the New Testament. And so we know from all of this that this was an AD 60s event. And we know it also from Arthurian legend, because in Arthurian legend, we have this curious event where Joseph of Arimathea, of course, does his bit and takes Jesus down from the cross.
Right.
But Joseph of Arimathea is a contemporary of Vespasian and Titus. Now, that's a real problem for Arthurian legend because, there's 40 years difference between the two.
You kind of intimated this in the last show.
Yeah, so the only thing they can do is they made him go to sleep. So that he went to sleep for 40 years and he wakes up thinking only 3 days has passed.
So another 40 years.
Yeah, to get him from the AD 30s back up to the AD 70s, because that was when these events really happened.
And he hung out on the Shroud of Turin while it was this 40 years.
Yes. So the events of the New Testament were in the AD 70s. And what happened was Jesus was the leader of the Jewish revolt, because the leader of the Jewish revolt was called King Jesus. But he lost the revolt, and he was tried, he was crucified, and he was sent into exile. Now, initially, he was sent into exile in Rome, but much later, they built a prison fortress in England, and he was sent to the prison fortress in England. So, and that's why we have that wonderful poem by William Blake saying, and did those feet in ancient times walk upon England's mountains green? And those feet are the Lamb of God. That's what it says. And the Lamb of God, of course, is Jesus. So why is William Blake saying that Jesus was in England? Well, because he was. He was exiled there as a prisoner of Rome.
So you're implying that he died in England?
Yeah, he would have died in England. So we have this tradition of Jesus being in England in the AD 70s. But of course, that was totally heretical.
Yeah.
You could not mention that. Even up until, 200 years ago, you could not mention that.
Yeah. Catholic Church probably an issue with it too.
Yeah, you would get the hot pokers of the Inquisition coming after you, if you sort of mentioned that. So how are you going to talk about this history in ways that are not going to get you killed? Well, what they did is they made up another story, and that story is Arthurian legend. And that's going to be the subject of my next book, actually, because I sort of brushed over this in a chapter almost, because it wasn't what I was looking for within this book. I was looking for a history of Jesus, and then I suddenly found this guy being exiled to England. And so, well, I had to write about it, so I wrote a chapter. But I'm going to come back to this story in the next book and do a whole book on the life of Jesus in England.
Wow.
So
that's going to rattle some cages.
Yeah, it will, but I mean, if you just look at, well, the Vulgate cycle tells us that there is a big link between them anyway. The Vulgate cycle is the big corpus of Arthurian legend. It's sometimes called the Lancelot Grail, and it's 6, 7, 8 books, and they're huge. It's a vast story about Arthur. But the story, a lot of it is not actually about Arthur, surprisingly enough, for Arthurian legend. A lot of it is about Joseph of Arimathea. And of course, he's a 1st century character, not a 6th century character. And one of the things it says about Arthurian legend is that you have 3 tables. So the first table was the table of the Last Supper.
Okay.
The second table was the round table of Josephus. This is there is a confusion of names here.
Because there's King Arthur on the round table.
Yeah, but this is the table of Josephus.
Okay.
This is there were 2 characters. There was Joseph of Arimathea, and his son was called Josephus, which is very confusing, and for a deliberate reason. It's deliberately done, because it's the same name as Josephus Flavius, the historian, of course. So we end up with a second table, the round table of Josephus, which is a table with 24 knights. And then we have the third table. They're all copies of each other. The third table is the table of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So all of these tables are the same, which means that the Last Supper table was a round table. It wasn't an oblong one like we see a rectangular table in most of the Last Supper scenes. It was a round table. And so you have a round table with the 12 disciples around the Last Supper table. And it is an Arthurian table. So when they talk about King Arthur and the 12 knights of the Round Table, they're actually talking about King Jesus and the 12 disciples of the Last Supper Round Table, because they are one and the same. They're copies of each other. Why are they copies? Well, because the tradition of Arthur came from the traditions of King Jesus in Judea. They're one and the same tradition. So, and all of the disciples were armed, of course. They all had swords, as it says in the New Testament, where Jesus, if you remember, sends out the disciples to go and buy swords. And then he says, I came not to bring peace to the earth. I came to bring a sword. That's from the New Testament, of course. So the disciples were armed. So the disciples were knights of the Round Table, the Last Supper Round Table. But why? What was the supper? What was the Last Supper table? Why this symbology of the round table? In Arthurian legend, they say it was so all of the knights were equal. They could all sit around this round table. But of course, it was nothing to do with that at all. Well, it probably did exist as a table because it was all symbolic of the original foundation. But the original foundation was of course, a zodiac. And so in that image, there's an image there on the sheet of the Arthurian table. If you compare that with the zodiac above it, it's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
With the hole in the center where Helios should be. So the Last Supper table was a zodiac. And so the 12 disciples, the 12 knights of the round table, were the 12 constellations of the zodiac. That doesn't mean they weren't real people, of course. They were real people, but you'll probably find all of the disciples were one of the constellations. So Matthew might be Aquarius and Luke might be Pisces, and they would be the characters of the round zodiac table.
Luke was the physician, but okay.
Yeah, and so and of course each of the knights would probably have a specific character according to which sign of the zodiac he was. They would all probably be assigned a zodiac that was appropriate to them and all that sort of business. But it was all done as a reenactment of the movement of the heavens above, which was the central element in this religion, was the movement of the heavens above.
Are you implying, therefore, that the 12 disciples that Jesus chose were more symbolic than actual?
Oh no, they were real people.
Okay.
But this was all one big reenactment. It's like going into a Masonic lodge where you become the characters in a play,
right?
And you reenact this play within the lodge.
All right.
So it helps when you go to lodge if you're a good actor, because that's what a lot of it is about. You actually play act.
It's interesting
various
you mention
parts.
that Messianic lodge because their number is 33.
Ah, yes.
To others, what we're discussing is 40.
Yeah, well, there are various different special numbers, and they've picked up 33. And off the top of my head, I can't exactly remember where 33 came from.
Is that how old Jesus was when he died?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
assumed that he died.
Was. I forget.
Yeah.
But yes, so as a way of explaining the movement of the heavens, you would have all these people as components in the heavens above. They would all be parts of the constellation, and of course the central character would be Jesus himself. That's why the person there in the center of the zodiac is dressed like a Jesus character with his purple robe and his halo, because he's the Jesus character. So on the Arthurian table, Arthur should not be sitting at the table. He should be sitting in the center of the table. That's the position of Arthur, in the center of the table, because he's the son. He's the son of God. The son, S-U-N, of God. And he should be in the center of the zodiac, and that's his place in the center.
I'm also looking at the round table picture that you provided, and I've really enlarged it. And in the center, it looks like the stones all come to a point right in the center. Yes, it does, doesn't it? Yes, it's a bit like that German one they made in Veslef. I forget the name of the castle. They made this zodiac in the castle in the Second World War. It had a very similar pattern to that as well. That's pretty interesting.
Yes. And then, of course, we have the other zodiac, which is above it, which is the opposite zodiac. So where did Arthur get his name? Well, we either have a zodiac with the sun in the center, which is how it's portrayed there on the Hamat zodiac, or that's sort of looking down from above, looking down on the universe. But if we're on the earth and look up, what we see is the constellations of the northern sky. So the center of the zodiac, if we look upwards, becomes Ursa Major. And Ursa Major is the Great Bear, which is Arthur. And that is where the name Arthur came from. So the character that sits in the center of the round table, in the center of the zodiac, is either the sun, Helios, the son of God, or he's the Great Bear, which is Arthur. And that's where the name Arthur came from.
That is fascinating. I'm enlarged so everybody can see that. That is so fascinating.
Which one? I've got it up here.
This one here.
Okay,
Walt.
I got it.
The one with the little bear on it, yes.
Yeah, with the bear.
And this is where the cart of Arthur comes from as well. You know, there were lots of mentions of the cosmic cart or chariot, and sometimes the cosmic chariot is described as being the Big Dipper. You know, the
Right.
of Ursa Major, because it sort of vaguely looks like a chariot or something, but that's not what it was actually talking about. What happens in the sky above, if you watch the skies at night, they turn around in this sort of, you know, circular motion.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And you have two spokes, two wheels with spokes.
Mm-hmm.
You have the daily turn of the Earth around the celestial pole. And then you have this precessional motion, which we were talking about, where the Earth wobbles. That causes another motion around the ecliptic pole. And so you get these two wheels turning in the sky. And these were the two wheels of Arthur's cart, Arthur's wagon. It was the two wheels of the cosmos in the sky. So again, we're talking about the motions of the cosmos, which was the central element of these old religions. And when we come on to talking about Stonehenge, which I'm sure we'll do in another talk at some point, these monuments as well were created to mimic this motion in the heavens above, because they knew about precession as well. Even, you know, at Stonehenge and Giza, they knew about precession.
Well, if you're saying that Jesus hung out in England, and Stonehenge, of course, is in England, is there any?
Well, Stonehenge would have predated
Okay, fair enough.
Jesus by a long margin, but
That's what I thought.
they are linked in that they're part of the same religion. So this was a religion that was fairly widespread across the world, probably in the Americas as well, probably even over in Asia, which everybody knew about: the workings of the cosmos, the form of the Earth, the size of the Earth, all these sort of astronomical and astrological components of the religion was widespread across all of the world. But the knowledge of it sort of shrunk into various little places. And so, you know, the knowledge of it died out in Britain. I don't suppose in the first century anyone sort of knew about it anymore. But the monuments were still there. You know, Stonehenge was still here. Avebury was still there. And Avebury is a picture of the Earth. That's what it is. We'll come on to that later when we talk about this. But so they knew the form and shape of the Earth because they were all marked out in the ancient megalithic monuments. Same with Giza. The Great Pyramid, again, is a picture of the Earth. It might not look it when you sort of see this pyramid, but I will show you later that it is a picture of the Earth.
Do you have any view or thought on what the pyramid in Egypt actually was constructed for?
Yeah, it's a map. They were all maps. All of these megalithic monuments were maps of the world. And the Great Pyramid is a map of the world. But you have to, in a way, you have to be initiated because it's very difficult to see. But as I always say with it, if you showed the picture to a 6-year-old, they'd say, yeah, it's a map of the world. The only thing that stops you from seeing it as a map of the world is our preconceptions about what the pyramids look like. But that's a whole different story because I'll have to send you the images, otherwise you can't visualize it.
Right.
But it's an absolute perfect map of the world, with markers on it down to, you know, the nearest degree of latitude. So it's perfect in every respect. So whoever built Stonehenge, Avebury, the Great Pyramid, the Second Pyramid, knew very precisely the form and shape of the Earth, and not only the form and shape of the Earth, but the dimensions and the lines of latitude and longitude as well, because they're marked on as well. Even on Avebury, it has lines of latitude and longitude marked on it. So it wasn't just someone making a circle. They actually made a circle with latitudes on it, so that you knew exactly how big the Earth was. So it's very technical. It's very complex. It's not really megalithic. It's from a degree of knowledge that goes way beyond the megalithic.
Well, you were saying that the pyramids were are maps, but
Yeah.
the zodiac symbols in the round table, is this somewhat of a map for prediction, or somewhat just of a map of just what?
Good question. I think this has more to do with chronology than anything else.
Okay.
Coming back to what I was saying before, that if you want to keep a history of mankind, how do you do it without losing great chunks of history? You could easily, within 12,000 years, you could miss 1,000 years and have the whole history with the completely wrong chronology,
Right?
Because you've missed a few thousand years here and there and whatever. Well, like we probably have done, because we think the pyramids were 4,000 BC, when
Way older.
they were probably a lot older
They're
than
probably
that.
30,000 years old.
I'm with the people who think they go back to the era of Leo. Well, because we know the era of Leo is linked to Giza via the Sphinx, then doesn't that give us a chronology that has a real hook onto real history, because it's
Absolutely.
recorded in the stars,
Absolutely.
and the stars don't lie.
No,
We
they
know
don't.
when the era of Leo was.
When was it in real? I'm just curious. When was it?
10,500 BC.
So 10,500 BC. Okay.
Yeah.
So
By marking it out with the constellations, the processional constellations, we can maintain history even when it's been forgotten. So we can go back and say, oh, well, actually, that's Leo. So that's actually 10,500 BC. So it's a lot older than we think.
absolutely.
And we can do that all the way back through history. So when we read about Gilgamesh killing the Bull of Heaven, well, the Bull of Heaven has to be Taurus, doesn't it? So Gilgamesh killing the Bull of Heaven must have happened in 1750 BC, because Gilgamesh, here's another sort of story that everyone's forgotten. The Epic of Gilgamesh comes from Sumer, of course, Mesopotamia. Gilgamesh is described as having, I'm just trying to remember, he's got a sword on his belt, he's got a bow, he's got a shield, and he's fighting the 7 splendors of the Humbaba in order to kill the Bull of Heaven. Well, what constellation has a sword and a shield and a bow and sits next to Taurus, which is the Bull of Heaven? And of course, just above the protector of the Bull of Heaven was the Humbaba, the 7 splendors of the Humbaba. Well, just above the Bull of Heaven, just above Taurus, you have the Pleiades, which is the 7 sisters. So the Humbaba is the 7 sisters. The Bull of Heaven is Taurus. And next door, pointing his bow at Taurus, is Orion. So Gilgamesh was Orion. This is the story of the heavens again. It's nothing to do with a prince called Gilgamesh, which is what they keep saying in history. They've just totally forgotten their history completely, and they don't understand what it's about. This is the story of the heavens.
Rewrote it.
Yeah. It's so obvious. I don't know why, any number of historians have read the Gilgamesh epic since it was translated.
Well,
and not one has seen that it's a story of the heavens. And I don't know why not, because it's so obvious.
maybe they don't want to see it.
Possibly. Quite possibly. I think they're blind sometimes. They're really, because the first time I read it, when I started doing this 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I didn't know that much about history. I'd never read Gilgamesh before, and I read Gilgamesh and I said, oh, that's Orion. There's nothing else it can be. It's got to be Orion. It's a story of the heavens, and it's the story of the precession of the Zodiac again, because Orion, being the biggest, most obvious constellation in the night sky, is the arbiter of the heavens. He's the king of the heavens.
Well, that makes sense because in the Great Pyramid there's a shaft, and there I believe there's two. One is directly toward Orion, and the other is to Sirius.
Well, it's not actually. We will go through that in a minute. Robert Bovell got this completely wrong. I wouldn't believe anything Bovell says. We will come back to that in just 2 minutes. But just to finish, the Gilgamesh epic is the same epic we've just been talking about. It's the precession of the equinox. So what it's talking about is the killing of the bull of heaven. So Orion, Gilgamesh is Orion. He's the one with the bow pointing at Taurus.
Okay.
And his job is to kill Taurus, because the great month of Taurus had just ended, and to see in the new great month, and the new great month was the great month of Aries, of course. This was the change between Taurus and Aries, and it happened in 1750 BC. So not only do we know what the Gilgamesh epic was, it was a story about Orion, but we also know when it was written. It was written in 1750 BC, because it's written in the heavens. And you see how this Zodiac business now orders our history. We can put a real chronology onto our history. Everything fits into place. So that's why I think we have this processional astrology. It's so that we can order our history, and we can order when certain things happened, when the gods came, when the gods are going to come back, and all of this sort of business. Coming back to the Great Pyramid pointing at Orion, Bovell got this wrong. It was a good idea, but it was just wrong. We have 4 shafts in the Great Pyramid which point in certain directions.
Okay.
And Bovell is saying that they point at certain stars. Now, for these shafts to point at certain stars, you have to be able to point the shaft at a star. Sounds obvious, doesn't it?
Right.
But that means that the shaft must go in a specific direction to point at a specific star.
Correct.
And its angle must be based on the position of the star in the heavens above.
Okay.
So each shaft must have a different angle of elevation to hit that particular star.
Different degree in terms of its
different degree, yeah.
Different degree given its angle.
Specific to that star, not specific to anything else.
Correct. Okay, given that assumption.
But that's not what happens, because those shafts are pi shafts. You remember I said that the Great Pyramid was image of pi, 40 times multiple of pi. Well, those shafts are pi shafts as well. So if you look at the difference between the angles of those shafts, the difference is 7/11, which is pi, 7/22. It's half of pi. So the angles of all of those shafts are governed by pi, not by the position of any star. And you cannot have a shaft that points, that is defined by pi, and then can point at any one particular star. It's just not possible. The shaft becomes fixed, and so it cannot point at a star. It's fixed. And that's the problem with the Bovell star pointing theory. A fixed shaft cannot point at a star. And so he's wrong. It doesn't point at stars. That's not the purpose of the shafts. They're not star pointers.
Well, some believe that the 3 main pyramids actually are the 3 stars in Orion's belt.
Well, that's probably true.
Okay, all right.
Because you need to know where to start the map, as it were.
Okay.
And unless you have a starting point, and the starting point is Orion, you've got no idea where to start your map. So yes, they are in the shape of the stars of Orion, but they are stars, of course. That's why they're there. But this is a multiple quest. You have to understand a lot about this quest before you know what it's talking about. They are also mountains. That's why it was called Mount Sinai. So they are representations of mountains, and that's why you will find that originally they were all pure white. They had Tura limestone until the Muslims came along and nicked all of the limestone, unfortunately. But the Great Pyramid was all white, pure white.
Okay.
The second pyramid was all white, apart from 2 layers at the bottom of granite. So it was all white with red at the bottom, or sort of, browny color at the bottom. And the third pyramid, which is much smaller, of course, was only half white and half brown at the bottom. So what's that meaning? This is the snow line.
Oh,
these are mountains.
Oh.
They have snow. The bigger mountain, because it's much higher, of course, is all snow. The smaller one, it's only slightly smaller,
right,
just has a small snow line at the bottom, so it has rocks at the bottom. And the third one, which is much smaller, only has snow on the peak.
I'm showing a picture of the three side by side. So
yeah. So unfortunately, all the Tura limestone is gone, so you can't see the effect anymore, because it would have been bright white against, quite ruddy brown at the bottom. And so they are mountains. They're mountains with snow on the top of them. So they're not just representations of stars. They're representations of mountains as well. And that's why the Great Pyramid was called Mount Sinai, to give you the hint that we're talking about a mountain. And it's something we won't have time to do at present because it's such a long subject. But there is a Great Pyramid, a real Great Pyramid, a very big Great Pyramid, up in the Himalaya, which I went and I discovered about 20 years ago now. And so, the Great Pyramid is a copy of a much bigger pyramid that is up in the Himalaya. And the big pyramid, of course, is all covered in snow, so it is pure white.
So you're saying that the Himalaya pyramid is older, of course, than the Great Pyramid?
No, they're both the same age, which is...
So the same age.
It's a very worrying concept, actually.
No, that's okay. I can follow that, but you're implying that the two were constructed at the same time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that begs the question: who built?
Who did it? Yeah. Because it's a piece of research that comes out with some very worrying or difficult to believe conclusions, even though mathematically it's perfect. It works absolutely perfectly. It means that whoever built the Great Pyramid also built another pyramid up in the Himalaya, which for 10,000 years ago, you've got to wonder who was up in the Himalaya building.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the first I've heard of this, and obviously I'm sure one of the Himalayas is good sized. So how it's kind of under wraps, or how come?
No, it's huge. It's vast.
I was going to say how come it's not more common knowledge?
Because it's the same problem with the map theory. What stops you seeing it is your preconceptions. If you showed it to a 6-year-old, they say, yeah, it's a pyramid. If you show it to an adult, they'll say, no, it can't be a pyramid. You see the difference?
That is fascinating. It's
the preconceptions. It's your understanding of the world that stops you seeing it from being a pyramid, even though it's quite obviously a pyramid. And it's not just a pyramid. It is a pyramid that has mathematics that shows exactly where it is.
Does it have chambers as the pyramid?
Well, I went to have a look actually, but unfortunately it's so remote. It's so difficult to get to. And it's so covered with ice and glaciers that I wasn't able to do the research I wanted to. I got to the base of it. It's 20,000 foot up, it's very high.
It's thin air up there.
Yeah, it's thin air, and also it takes
Right.
It took me 2.5 weeks to walk to get to it.
Wow.
That's how long it takes to walk. So it's right up in the middle of nowhere. So you'd never discover it without mapping and aircraft and satellites and so on. You'd never even know it's there, really.
I just pulled a picture and showed it to people.
I'm looking at it myself.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, as an adult, I would not say that. Yeah, that's a pyramid. I mean, I can see the resemblance of a pyramid now that you say it. But if I just looked at it as a picture, I'd be, it's a mountain.
The Great White Pyramid of Tibet.
Have you seen the map of it though? Have you got the map from above?
Let me see if I can
I'll have
find
to
it.
send you the map.
Yeah, I'd like to
unless
see
you
it.
see the map of it with the topography around it, you won't be able to see it.
And if you're just tuning in, this is Truth Be Told. We're talking to Ralph Ellis, an amazing author and researcher. And we're talking right now about the pyramids in not only Egypt but the Himalayas. And I cannot believe I'm like fascinated.
Yeah, and his theory is that the pyramid in Egypt is also Mount Sinai, mentioned of course in the Bible.
Right.
And
we have about 20 minutes left, and Ralph, I want you to kind of guide us to where we're going to go, because we were going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant.
We could, oh yes, we've got 20 minutes of the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah,
we can do it in 20 minutes.
Yeah, let's do that.
Fire away.
We've teased it at the beginning, and I know a lot of people are.
Yeah, we got to address this.
Yeah, so we're talking about the history of the Ark of the Covenant. Where did it go to? We tend to lose it after the 6th century BC.
Some feel it's in Ethiopia.
Yeah, well, that was a good idea, and I mean, it could have even have gone there. I don't know, but it ended up back in Edessa, and this is Edessa in northern Syria. This is the Edessa of the Edessan monarchy, King Akbar, King Isus Manu, who was King Jesus Emmanuel, the biblical Jesus, and they lived in Edessa. And they had a necropolis. This is the royal necropolis, just outside Edessa, and that is at Sogmatar. And that's if you see the two hills on the next piece of images we've got two hills. One is at Sogmatar, and the other one is at Silbury. And as you can see, they're identical. And this was actually a little bit worrying to start with, because they're exactly the same size. So how can you have and they're both man-made, of course. So we've got a man-made mound in Syria, and it's exactly the same as the one we've got in Silbury in Britain. So yeah, that got me interested. But on the top of this hill in Sogmatar, it had an inscription, and I'll just read it very quickly. It said, this is from the 1st century. It said, in Sabbat of the year 476, which is actually 165, I think, AD. We set up this pillar on this blessed mountain and erected a seat for anyone who maintains it, for the one who maintains it. The governor will be the Buddha, who is second in authority to the governor, and he will give the seat to one who is going to maintain it. Now, the translation of this has had various translations put upon it, but the pillar is actually a netzib, and the netzib is a metzib, which was the small pillar that Jacob anointed, if you remember, way back in the Old Testament, and he anointed this little pillar with oil, had the same name. And so it's not a pillar, and I did find one historian that actually translates it correctly, and they call it a betel. And a betel, of course, is the sacred stones. It's a small conical little stone, sacred stone. So it's not a pillar on this mountain. It was a netzib, which is a small omphalos stone, a small sacred stone. And the seat is a cursor. And so we've got this stone and a seat together. And that had me wondering for a while, but the cursor seat is exactly the same as we get on the Ark of the Covenant, where the lid of the covenant was called the mercy seat. And so we have a seat and a stone together in the Ark of the Covenant. We have a netzib and a cursor, which is the seat and the stone.
So if I might digress real quick, how do you correlate the fact that these two mountains are related?
Well, that was a problem, because everyone says that the Sogmatar Hill is 1st century.
Okay.
And that can't really be, because the one in Wiltshire is Neolithic. So how can the 1st century people in Edessa be copying something that's Neolithic in Britain? It didn't seem right to me, and I think I've discovered now that it's not first century at all. It's the same age as the one in Britain.
Okay, so the
So
same
when
age. Okay.
when we were talking, as we were before, about places like Stonehenge and Avebury, all being the same across many countries,
Okay.
this is one of those things that was the same across many countries. And so lots of these different monuments were built. But on top of this particular one in the first century, we had this seat and this sacred stone. And if you have a look at the coin on the left, so we've got a coin with a temple and a square box in it. Now, the historians call that a betel, a cubic betel stone, they call it. But of course, it can't be a betel stone, because if you look at the top one, it has little feet underneath it. And there's no way a stone of that weight would have little feet under it. And on the second, it's very difficult to make out, but you can see little wheels under the second one.
Okay.
So you've got a cube with wheels underneath it.
Oh.
They're very, very difficult to make out. You might have to blow it up and have a look at it. But anyway, you can see wheels under it. So they're confused. When they call it a betel is not a stone. A betel is a house of God, Bethel. And so it's not a stone, it's the house that contains the stone. And that is the Ark of the Covenant, of course. That's what the Ark was. It was a box that held the sacred stones that Moses got down from Mount Sinai and stuck in his little box. And that's what we see in this temple. So we have a picture of a temple with a box inside of it.
Okay.
And it's a box with a stone and a mercy seat, exactly like we have in the Ark of the Covenant. So that is an Ark of the Covenant. Now, unfortunately, we don't know if it's the original one, because someone could have remade the box, of course. We don't know if it's the original Ark, but it's an Ark of the Covenant. But what we do know is that they had the sacred stone. Now, strangely, the sacred stone is not like we tend to think of it in normal history, which is a tablet. It was an omphalos stone. And on the right, you can see what an omphalos stone looks like. So on the right, we have the omphalos of Delphi, which is covered in sort of chains, or I don't know what you call them, actually. I'm still wondering what they are. They look like seashells.
Yeah, it looks like
all over this stone.
Puka
Anyway,
nipples.
that's
Puka
what an
shells?
omphalos
Puka
looks
shells
like.
almost.
Yeah.
Well, they're a little bigger than puka shells, but okay.
Yeah. I sometimes think that they might be planets and stars and things like that, but I don't know. I've got no idea. But on the right of that, you'll see again what it looked like, because this is an original coin. This is this coin of Antiochus from Greece. Actually, it's from Persia, actually, when the Greeks ruled Persia. And you can see exactly the same stone.
Mm-hmm.
So the stone that we've got in Delphi today is actually the stone on this coin, which I love things like that, where you can actually see the original stone on a coin from that era. And this coin will be 2nd century BC or something. And you can see a god, that's Apollo, sitting on this exact same stone, with the netting going across it as well, exactly the same. And that's what an omphalos stone looks like. And that is the stone that would have been inside the Ark of the Covenant, not a tablet. It looked like this.
Well, I heard one story that the Ark on the inside was lined with gold, and that if
it was supposed to be lined with gold outside. Yes.
Oh yes, and if you open it, that people would die, implying that some feel that it was radiation.
No, it was magnetic. This was the big thing about this stone. It was supposed to be not just any old stone. It was supposed to be meteoric. Okay. And it was probably meteoric ferrous. So it was highly magnetic.
Interesting.
And if you put a highly magnetic stone inside an ark, then the ark will become magnetic.
Fair enough.
And if you approach it with something that's made of iron, it'll get stuck on the ark.
Okay.
And of course, this is where we get this idea of the Arthurian sword in the stone from. So when it talks about a sword being stuck in a stone, it's actually a sword stuck on a big magnet. And of course, if you were a knight, 2,000 years ago or whenever, and you took your sword near to a stone, and God reached out and grabbed your sword and stuck it on the stone, I think you would be highly confused, wouldn't you?
Right.
Get my attention.
Yeah, yeah.
It certainly would get your attention. See, suddenly you've got this sword stuck on this stone. But Arthur
Excalibur.
had no problem. He could put his sword on the stone and withdraw it without any problem. How did he do that?
Well, therefore, the sword was made of something.
Precisely.
different.
You've got it in one. And it says in Wolfram Eichenbach, when he wrote Parsifal, which is another Arthurian legend, that the swords, the knives used by the keepers of the stone, because the Holy Grail in Parsifal is actually a stone. It's not a Holy Grail. It's not a cup. It's actually a stone. But the knives that the attendants used were made of silver.
Really?
So they're not going to get stuck. So yeah, this is where the sword in the stone comes
again,
from.
Again, element of value.
Yeah, but it's a real good trick, isn't it? I mean, if you've got this sacred stone, you can show it to someone, and they will be utterly amazed because they will have no idea how someone is grabbing this thing off you. And if you say you had a horseshoe or something, and you took this horseshoe and you held it close to this stone, an invisible thing would come out and grab it from you. I mean, it would be truly baffling, wouldn't it? You would have no idea what's going on.
Right.
It would be quite a fascinating thing to have if you had a very highly magnetic stone. And so we get this tradition of these very sacred stones. There might have been two of them, of course, because there were supposed to be two in the Ark of the Covenant. And here we see, on this silver coin, we see Apollo sitting on top of this stone. And in the bottom one, we see that this stone was still around. So the silver stone is from Persia in 2nd century BC, when Greece ruled all of Persia. And then this stone went to Sogmatar, which is this hill on the top. So the Edessan monarchy had this stone in the 2nd century AD. This is King Wael, the king you can see there, who was an Edessan king. And then if you look at the gold one down the bottom, now this is interesting because this is Emperor Elagabalus. This is an emperor of Rome called Elagabalus, who's not actually very well known. Not many people know about him. And you will see the stone again. He took it to Rome. So Elagabalus came from Syria. He came from just down the road from Edessa. So he came from exactly the same region as this stone was in the 2nd century. So we come to the 3rd century and Elagabalus, and he has got the same stone. So we're pretty sure it was in Edessa in the 2nd century. And he took it to Rome because he became the emperor of Rome. And here we see it in much better detail because this is a good stamped Roman coin.
Yeah, very good.
And
very
yeah,
well
it's very
preserved.
precise, isn't it? And you can see it's being pulled by a quadriga again, a 4-horse chariot, through the streets of Rome with this domed rock in the back of it. And can you see on the rock is embossed the phoenix? You can see the phoenix.
When you really look at it, you can see it.
Yeah, you've got to look close, but you'll see the phoenix on the stone. So it was a sunstone. It was supposed to be a meteorite. It came down from the heavens above. It was the phoenix flashing through the skies in a great fire, ending up on the ground, of course, as this meteorite. And that was supposed to be this great omphalos stone. And it was taken to Rome in the 3rd century. But what happened to that stone, we don't know. Elagabalus was not very popular. He was a galley priest, which is linked again to the New Testament. So this is all linked to this same story about Jesus. So we haven't strayed very far. It's the same region. Edessa was the hometown of Jesus, of course, because the king of Edessa was called King Esus Manu, and Jesus was called King Jesus Emmanuel. He was the same king. And he owned this coin. And I don't know if you know, I don't have the quote here with me, but anyway, in the New Testament, Jesus asks if his disciples will get castrated and become eunuchs. I don't know if you know that verse.
I did not. I don't.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'll grab it for you, and then you can put it
I
up.
looked up the verse in Luke where you said Jesus told him to go buy a sword. I didn't know that was in there either.
Yeah. Well, that's there.
That is there.
You found that one.
Yes, I did.
Anyway, if you've got an electronic Bible, you'll find it now if you want. Just doing a search for eunuchs with an S on the end, eunuchs, and you'll find the verse. Anyway, Jesus asks if his disciples would become eunuchs. Why? Because in Syria, the high priesthood used to be a eunuch, and he was known as a galley priest, and which is where we get the Galileans from, because they were galley. And so the high priest was a eunuch. And Emperor Elagabalus, the king on this the emperor on this coin, Elagabalus, was also a eunuch. He turned himself into a eunuch. So he was a galley priest, exactly the same as the disciples of Jesus were galley priests. And he had the stone, just like Jesus had the stone in Edessa. So you can see the links coming here through. That this stone and the eunuch priests go together through northern Syria down into Judea. He was an emperor of Syria, and he took it to Rome. But the Romans weren't very impressed with this. It was illegal in the Roman Empire to be a eunuch for a start, so he was onto a loser, this guy. And so he didn't last very long. I think he only lasted about 6 or 7 years, and he got thrown into the sewers.
Oops.
So yeah, it was a definite oops end, that one. So yeah, he was deposed and he was killed, but we don't know what happened to the stone. So we have this very important stone that had been kept for thousands of years. This was supposed to be the stone that started off in Egypt. This was the Ben stone. You remember at the beginning of this talk, we talked about the primeval mound that came out of the chaotic waters of Nu. That was the Ben stone. And this was the Ben stone. It's the same stone. So all the way back from the very beginnings of Egypt, this stone has gone through the same story. It's gone all the way through up into Greece. The Greeks took it to Persia with Alexander the Great. It was brought back again from Persia by Queen Theomusa Urania, who was an Egyptian princess who married into the Persian royal line, and she brought the stone back to Syria. So it ended up on the top of the hill in Edessa, in Sogmatar. And from Edessa, it ended up in Syria. And Elagabalus took it down to Rome, and then it disappears. So we don't know what happened. I mean, it was a very important stone. It's been, part of history for thousands and thousands of years. And we don't know why the Romans got rid of it. Why were the Romans not very impressed with it? I don't know. And where did it go to?
Because they were Romans, for goodness sakes.
Well, yeah, but they were very religious people. But obviously they didn't like the stone very much because it didn't last very long in Rome. I get a suspicion it ended up in England. Because at this very moment in time, they built a new Temple of the Zodiac in England. Now, when I said before that Jesus had ended up in exile in England.
Yes.
Right.
Well, he ended up in Chester, in Fortress Diwa. So the Romans built a new fortress, which was hiding away as far from Judea as you could possibly get. I mean, in the Roman Empire, if you wanted to get away from Judea, the furthest you could possibly get was Chester in England. And so we ended up with this fortress in the middle of nowhere that wasn't really doing anything, that had a special area in the center, which nobody knows what it was for. But the special area had its own accommodation block, its own bathhouse, and its own temple. And strangely enough, the temple they built was a temple of the Zodiac. Exactly like we had back in Galilee with Hamat Tiberia Zodiac that we talked about at the very beginning. So we end up with this, and of course the Romans were not very big on the zodiac. This was not a Roman thing, and there is no other temple like this in the entire Roman Empire. And there is one in this fortress, and of course fortresses didn't even have temples. You don't put a temple in the middle of the fortress.
Right.
Quite obviously, this fortress was a prison fortress, and the reason it ended up with a temple of the Zodiac is because this was the fortress where Jesus was kept under.
So
There was a prison fortress.
The significance of the prisoner was the one that had some significance.
Yeah, this was a giant Guantanamo Bay stuck in Chester, as far away as they could from the rest of the Roman Empire, to get these people away from their power base in Judea. But it had a temple of the Zodiac. However, in AD, I don't know, something like 98, just about the very time Jesus would have been dying, this temple was destroyed. So it was pulled down completely.
Wow.
And it was a temple of Pisces as well. It wasn't just a temple of the Zodiac. It was a Vesica Piscis. It was a temple of Pisces. Anyway, they pulled it down in AD 98. But just after Elagabalus died, no, just actually during his reign, when Elagabalus, this emperor on the gold coin, when he started his reign, they rebuilt it in Chester, in England, the Temple of the Zodiac, the Temple of Pisces. Why did they do that? We have no idea. And they built it again as a Temple of Pisces, as a Vesica Piscis, the symbol of the fish that they have in Christianity. We have no idea, but we do know that Elagabalus worshipped this stone. And perhaps if he wanted to keep it safe because it wasn't very well liked in Rome, maybe he thought, well, we could put it away on the edge of the empire somewhere where it might be safe. It's a guess at this moment in time, but I've got a suspicion that this stone ended up in Chester, in England.
Have you been there by chance?
Yeah, I used to live there actually.
Okay, because I'm sure it's not far.
So
from
I know
there.
it. Yeah, I know it very well.
Yeah,
But unfortunately, this is where the modern world has damaged our history. Unfortunately, they've built a shopping centre on it.
Oh, great! That sounds about right.
Figures.
Yeah, and the problem is with this shopping centre is it's got an underground car park.
Oh no!
Wow.
So they've dug the whole lot up.
So it's
What they
unfortunate
did is before they,
Yeah.
the reason we know about this temple is because they found it when they were digging the foundations for this supermarket, and so they did some archaeology, and they you know how in archaeology they put trenches across, so they stuck 3 trenches across this, so they know what this temple looked like. But of course they didn't look at all of it. They didn't have time to look at all of it. They only had the 3 trenches that went across, and then the rest of it was dug up and thrown away. And for 4 or 5 years now, I've been trying to find where they put that spoil from that region when they dug it up, because there might be any amount of archaeology in that spoil heap, but I don't know where they put it. Nobody knows where they put it anymore. They've lost all the records.
You would think.
Yeah.
Ralph, I hate to say we're running out of time.
We have blown through an hour and 50 minutes.
And
gosh,
I
time
can't
flies.
Change.
I really this is going to open another invitation because we have you are like one of the most fascinating guests.
Yes, most definitely.
You have so much great information and stuff that I love when I can go into something I'm like I know nothing about and then walk away going I feel pretty good now. But I hope
there's some new topics there, wasn't there?
and I hope you come back again. And I know Eddie would love to be here next time, and Walt's going to be here next time.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, how can people find out more information about you?
About you and where you're on your website and such.
Yeah, well, the website is edfubooks, edfu-books.com. So that's my website. It's got all the books on there. There is also a Facebook page, which is the King Jesus Facebook page, and I'm often posting things on there, so people can get in contact.
Okay, right.
And the books themselves, well, the latest one, which is doing the best, I suppose, is the King Jesus trilogy. So that's Cleopatra to Christ, King Jesus, and Jesus King of Edessa. It's mainly all on ebooks now, with the iPad iBooks being the best.
Oh, that's great.
There are some still books that are available, paper books from Adventures Unlimited, so you can get those as well.
Adventures Unlimited.
But I have, David Childress has been very good. He's done all of the paper books, but of course the paper books will be a couple of editions in the past, of course, because you can't update them as fast as you can with the ebooks. That's one of the good things about ebooks.
And for the ebooks also, you can put links in them.
Yeah,
stuff too.
and I've got video clips in there and things like that. So I'm beginning to like the ebook format. You know, some people don't; they like the paper, but I'm beginning to like it because it's so much more flexible.
Exactly.
So all of those are available, Amazon or iPad. The iPad ones are better because Amazon still won't allow video clips.
Really?
No, they
That's
won't.
surprising.
You still can't do them. So
Interesting.
Especially having their own video content. So you would think.
Yeah, I don't know why they haven't updated. I think it's because their tablet is not so
They're
complex
Yeah,
as the iPad, and it just won't cope with it.
Could be.
Well, like I said, we appreciate you and definitely want you back. And thank you for staying up. I know it's really late there.
1 or 2 o'clock in the morning where you are. Isn't it?
Yeah, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, well, it's time for you to go to bed then.
Thanks for staying up.
Thank you, sir, and
My pleasure, yes.
thank God for Skype so we can see this handsome face here,
Absolutely.
right? All right.
He looks like he's just woke up.
And it's very nice to be on the show, and you do very good videos when they come up on YouTube as well. They're very good.
And this will be up on YouTube for the ones that have tuned in and just missed half of it, or if you're listening on podcast, go to YouTube TVUBN, and you can watch the whole thing on video.
There it is.
All right, Ralph, we'll talk to you soon.
You take care of yourself.
Yeah,
we'll
good
chat
to see you, and we'll see you again
chat
next time.
Sooner next than last.
Yes. All right. All right. Take care, my friend. All right. Well, Wolf, that was great.
I don't know. How do you close that out? Is like,
I know.
Stay tuned for more.
Well, I kept wanting, we're running out of time, but I'm like, it was, it was so interesting.
There's a plethora of other things that we never even touched on.
Oh,
that I'm not even going to mention because
it's just more teasers for everybody else.
This guy has done his homework, and you scratch your head going, oh my gosh,
the things we've been taught,
it
and
fits,
things
right? And what. Oh man, what's true and what's not? What do we believe and what's not?
Well, that's the thing is, you hear people and it's so far fetched, but he gives such credible, detailed descriptions and research.
He backs up what he says.
Yeah, so it's hard to say. But anyway, the truth be told, like I said, is not necessarily a truth of yours, but this is a place that you can come and hear somebody else's truth and walk away thinking differently. And we want to thank you guys. We really appreciate you tuning in.
I hope you enjoy the show as much as we do.
Every Friday at 4.
Yeah.
And, try to do every Friday at 4 when we can. Next week, we do have a guest. We're going to be talking about Atlantis. Frank Joseph, author Frank Joseph, is going to be on the show. And it's going to be great. So hopefully Eddie will be back. We're not for sure yet. If not,
I sure will be here.
Yeah, if not,
either
Walt
way,
and I will be here. So,
bet.
All right. Well, we thank you so much. Watch us on YouTube, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Take care.